Bonafide beats, heavy hit splits, wildfire style, freak flows fast.
Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast. I would like to personally thank the folks that have reached out and continue to tune in and support the channel. I ask that you bear with us. We're all learning to use this equipment and try to get better audio and provide better content with every podcast that we put out. So thank you for tuning in again. And today's episode is called The Men Up Front. Today we're going to deal with this offensive line. And we've had extended discussions over the last few videos about the importance of an offensive line to a football team. And the Dolphins' offensive line, they just did not deliver this season. And that's for various reasons, whether that's injuries or personnel changes, or if it's the infamous tank that we've all suspected and a lot of us have discussed about whether or not the Dolphins were tanking this season. And this is the only thing that I'm going to say on that note, and we're going to go ahead and move forward. And that's if you can get consensus about anything around the NFL where coaches absolutely despise turnover or injuries, that's on the offensive line. And if you look around the NFL in any given season, if you see an offensive line with a lot of turnover, I can pretty much guarantee you that that offense was not very good. And conversely, that means that that team was not very good. And the Dolphins experimented with their offensive line a lot this season, regardless of injuries. And that is what I would point to if I were going to use evidence to say that the Dolphins were tanking this season. And that's just because that's just the one area of the football team where you don't touch it. You want to have that position group settled before the dress rehearsal game, which is the third preseason game. And after that, you don't mix and match. Because at that position, it's like a choreographed dance. Those guys need as many snaps together as possible, and they have to kind of be in each other's head to know what the other guy's thinking. How is he going to block? Who's he going to block? And how can I support him in setting those blocks to give the offense the best chance to move forward? So what we're going to do is we're going to start picking this roster apart, and we're going to lump players into different categories, okay? I got about 4 categories in my list here. And the first category is simple. The first category is studs. These are the players that you don't have to worry about. You're not even thinking about replacing that player because they're annually competing for a Pro Bowl or a first team All-Pro. And the only situation where you're looking for a replacement for that player is either through injury, contract, or someone just blows you away with an offer that you just simply cannot refuse to trade that player. The second category, this is a category I like to call a starter. And what this player is this is a player that is not going to lose you a football game, but they're also not going to win you a football game. And you're comfortable with that player starting on Sunday, but you're not expecting anything more than just that. He's not going to win you the game. He's not going to lose you the game. And the league is built upon starters. It's not built upon studs because there's only so many of those guys to go around. The next category I like to call incumbents. And these players are either draft picks or veterans that you've claimed or signed that you feel have some upside. They're not consistent enough to be called starters, but you're definitely going to find them some competition. You're going to bring somebody else in to push these players to gain that position because they just haven't done enough consistently to take a starting job. And finally, we have a category that I like to call duds. And these guys are littered around the NFL, and they're going to be on somebody's roster. These are the players that the team has not found a way to replace just yet. And these are usually the guys that coaches find on game film and they try to target. And there's a term that's called masking your weaknesses. And a lot of times it revolves around trying to cover up duds in the NFL. These are guys that you're definitely inviting anybody to camp and you're drafting players to try to replace these players. Okay? So let's get started. The first category is easy. There are no studs on this offensive line. There just aren't any. And the one stud that you did have on the offensive line, Houston gave you a trade that you just simply could not resist. And there's usually always going to be a player like that. if it's not a quarterback. Laramie Tunsil may get a gold jacket, but the reality is 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. And, oh, by the way, the potential that you may draft a certain left-handed quarterback out of Alabama makes the left tackle less important than the right tackle. So Miami simply just doesn't have any studs on this offensive line, which moves us to the next category, and that's starters. And from my view and what I've watched this season, the only starter is Jesse Davis. And I think the Dolphins agree with that because they signed him to a 2-year extension in this offseason. Jesse Davis has played all along that offensive line, and if you go through that game tape, you won't find games where Jesse Davis beat you, and you won't find games where Jesse Davis won you the game. But over the last few games of the season, Jesse Davis showed some elite traits, but you can't put him in a stud category yet because he just hasn't done it enough consistently for you to justify that status. So what do we have for incumbents? And on my list of incumbents, I see draft picks Michael Dieter, undrafted free agent Shaq Calhoun, Evan Bain, and Julian Davenport. And these are guys that are all 26 and under, and they may have some upside. And Michael Dieter being a draft pick, his status is pretty much solidified to be on the roster next season, at least to go into camp. But we all know Brian Flores. There are no guarantees, and he's just going to have to simply improve because he was just consistently inconsistent. And the same goes for Shaq Calhoun. Shaq Calhoun showed some elite traits in the running game, but he was just not consistent. And towards the end of the season, it was blatantly obvious that he hit the rookie wall and he was just burned out. That brings us to Julian Davenport. And it looks to me like the team obviously feels that he has some upside. He was one of the players that we got in the trade with the Houston Texans for Laramie Tunsil. And one thing about Julian Davenport is he has elite traits from a physical standpoint. He's very tall. He has really, really long arms, and it's hard to get around him. But his technique needs a whole lot of work. And because of that, he's just not a consistent player. The next player is Evan Bain. And Evan Bain shows some elite traits in the run blocking game, and he's nasty. He can play guard or he can play center. So I think that versatility will get him an invite to camp next season. Now, I do want to put an asterisk by center Daniel Kilgore. Kilgore is a grizzly veteran, and he's a locker room guy. The only reason I don't have him listed here as a starter is quite simply to the fact that it seems obvious based on Chris Greer's comments that they're going to look to try to replace Daniel Kilgore. And I don't know if Daniel Kilgore is going to stay around or if he's going to actually be trade bait. What that gives me is I could possibly see as many as 4 new starters on the offensive line next season. And that would be warranted. And quite honestly, it would probably be the position group that I would expect the most turnover in next season. We've already chronicled the extensive amount of money that Miami has to be able to spend in free agency and the assets that they've accumulated in the draft. So what are some of the options that are out there for Miami to potentially add talent to this roster? And what we're going to do is we're not going to go through the entire list of available free agents. That's the Dolphins' job. But we are going to stick to some big fish that are in free agency. And first and foremost is Brandon Scherff, the guard out of the Washington Redskins. Brandon Scherff is only 28 years old, and he's easily one of the 3 best guards in the NFL. But there's a problem. Due to injuries, he's missed 15 games the last 3 seasons. So maybe there's an opportunity that price comes down. And I don't know if those injuries are going to scare the Dolphins away. And the other big fish in free agency is Jack Conklin, the right tackle in Tennessee. And you already know how I feel about Tennessee's offensive line. And for me, this would be the ideal player to add. Miami could sign Jack Conklin and slide Jesse Davis over to right guard, which is where Jesse Davis has played the most in his career. And that leaves two other big fish in free agency. The issue with both of these guys is they're both 30 years old or older, and we know how that is in the NFL. One is Anthony Costanzo, the left tackle from Indianapolis. And if Miami's going to draft a certain left-handed quarterback, I don't see them going big money in free agency for a left tackle. The last big fish in free agency is Brian Bulaga, the right tackle in Green Bay. And I don't see him wanting to leave Green Bay, number one. So let's start there. And the other thing is, I think Jack Conklin would make a much better fit for Miami, given his age and his recent performance. So my plan this offseason, what I would do if I were general manager Chris Grier, is I would target Jack Conklin in free agency. Tennessee only has a certain number of franchise tags, just like everybody else, and they're going to have to use that franchise tag on either Ryan Tannehill or Derrick Henry. So I would go after Jack Conklin as my big fish in free agency on the offensive line, and then I would turn right back around and draft Wisconsin center Tyler Biadasz. And I hope I'm not butchering this young man's name because he is a very, very good football player. And I would pair him back with Michael Dieter in camp and see if Michael Dieter can improve. That kicks Jesse Davis back into right guard. You can put Biadasz at center, or he can also play guard, and there's more of that scheme versatility that the team likes. And you can insert Dieter at left guard and run with Davenport at left tackle, and then you can draft for depth behind that. And that would be my plan moving forward for this offensive line. What will the Dolphins do? Only Chris Grier and Brian Flores know. So that's going to do it for this episode. And moving forward, the next question is, who will this offensive line be protecting? And that's the question that's on a lot of Dolphins fans' minds. So I'll see you for the next episode, The Trigger Man.
We got keys to the underground. Shimty. Killer Hurt. This for you. About to get sick with it. Exclusive. People. As quick as I can spit it, I'm sick with it. Survivor. You and yours? Riders, born pieces of shit, flip scripts just to get rich. In this rap world, I murder everything except track, y'all whack. A matter of fact, you never seen dead bodies, the aftermath of what I just did with my army. Deep with heat, lurking the outskirts, politic with government affiliates, fireworks tied in the wind. Regardless, thugged out the hardest, eliminate the fakes while I arbitrate flesh to flesh. I'm the most treacherous you ever met.